The NFL Draft happens every year at roughly the same time during the offseason. It's one of the biggest events in football. Teams that had a less than ideal or straight up disappointing season line up to select the potentially franchise-changing player that will be a fan favorite for years to come. This will be a video that you don't want to miss, so stick around to catch it all. First up, first overall drama. If you were paying attention to the draft rankings prior to the draft, then you knew that this year was a toss-up for the player that was going to be honored as the first player selected. Usually, there's one player that is deemed heads and tails above the rest, and the team that gets to select first overall rushes to the stage to ensure that this player joins the ranks of their club ASAP. But this year, things were different. It wasn't that the players on the board were worse than other years, but there was no clear-cut first overall pick. There were so many players that could have fit the bill for first overall that the Jacksonville Jaguars were put in a bit of a difficult spot trying to select the best available player in the 2022 NFL Draft. The Jaguars ended up selecting Trayvon Walker, a defensive end from Georgia. People were relatively surprised that his name was the first one to be said at this year's draft. Walker actually was not even in the conversation for first overall until recently, and even then, he was still not the frontrunner to go first until he was selected there. People were thinking that the Jags were going to go with a tackle of some sort and either select Evan Neal or Ikem Ekwonu, but the club decided to go with Walker instead. While he may not have been anyone else's first pick for first overall, pick was not too much of a reach, as it was pretty much certain that Walker was a top 10 talent in this year's draft, and maybe even a top 5 talent, so he would have been snatched up by somebody very quickly if the Jags had passed on it. So now there's a question that is burning in everyone's mind, but cannot be answered for at least 2 to 3 years. Is Walker the best player out of the 2022 draft, or did the Jaguars make the wrong call? Should somebody else have gone first overall? While it is essentially impossible to definitely say who the best player in the draft is, considering the fact that nobody in the draft has even stepped onto the field in an NFL uniform, it doesn't stop us from speculating and seeing if there may be somebody else in the draft that should have gone first overall. Obviously, as we've seen in years past, the draft is a bit of a crapshoot, and draft position means literally nothing. Looking at players like Tom Brady or Joe Montana, who were both selected outside of the first round and the second round, with Tom not being selected until the 6th round, and Joe not being selected until the 3rd round. Clearly, players can become superstars in this league, despite their draft selection, but more often than not, players selected in the first round are destined to be impact players in the NFL. So is Walker an impact player, or are there some other players who we could argue were the right choice on draft day for the Jaguars? Well, it seems like the Jaguars had their minds made between 4 different players. Obviously Walker, Neal, and Ekwonu, as we mentioned earlier. But apparently, according to the Jaguars front office, they were also considering drafting Aiden Hutchinson, a fellow defensive end from Michigan. So which of these 4 would have been the best choice to go first overall? Well, for starters, both Walker and Hutchinson are defensive ends, and it's clear that the Jaguars wanted to bolster that part of their lineup. So it seems like they were more inclined to select either one of Walker or Hutchinson before they selected either Neal or Ekwonu, who are both offensive tackles. The Jaguars seem to think that they already have their star offensive tackle in Cam Robinson, who they gave a franchise tag to for the 2nd year in a row. So even if they believed that Ekwonu or Neal were genuinely better players than Walker or Hutchinson, they probably still would have selected either of them before they selected anyone who played the same position as Robinson. So it was really only between the 2 defensive ends going first overall. So who is better between Hutch and Walker? Hutch ended up being selected 1 pick later by the Detroit Lions, who are struggling to find a star in any position really. So to me, that almost makes me think that this is exactly who the Lions wanted already. Does that mean that they also thought Walker was better and that they just assumed that he would be off the board for their pick? Or were they hoping for Hutchinson to fall to them? What does the NFL think? According to the NFL, both of these players are elite prospects, but the NFL seems to believe that Hutchinson will be the bigger immediate impact, as they have given him a prospect rating of 6.80 and have given him a tentative year 1 starter page. While this does ultimately mean nothing, as even the NFL can't tell the future, or so we think anyway, it's always a tough blow to see that the guy you picked over him has a prospect rating of only 6.48 and has been given the tag of good starter in 2 years. Again, draft position means literally nothing, so Walker could end up being the best defensive end the league has has ever seen. Or he could be literally garbage and play a single down of NFL football before never playing again. It's tough to say right now, but typically you do not want your first overall selection to be rated worse than anybody else in the draft. What is even worse though is the fact that the other two guys the Jaguars were going to select, Evan Neal and Ikem Ekwonu, went way farther than the Jags anticipated, with Ekwonu being selected 6th overall by the Carolina Panthers and Neal being selected 7th by the New York Giants. While you could easily argue that Neal and Ekwonu each played a position that the team selecting 2nd through 5th did not need bolstering, it is still an odd sign that no other team wanted the players that were so highly touted by the Jaguars. Does that speak to the poor judgment of the Jaguars, or does it speak to the poor judgment of every other team drafting 2nd through 5th? Well, the players that were selected 2nd through 5th go as follows. Aiden Hutchinson, as we already mentioned, by the Lions. Then Derek Stingley, a defensive back drafted by Tennessee. Then Sauce Gardner, a cornerback selected by the New York Jets. Then finally, Kayvon Thibodeau, an edge drafted by the New York Giants. The thing that stands out to me is that all of these players are ranked higher than Walker, with most of them having the Year 1 starter tag. While being great in your rookie season doesn't necessarily mean too much, as it is the longevity that matters in the NFL, it should still be slightly worrisome for fans of the Jags, as at least from the perspective of NFL experts, they seemingly made the wrong choice with the first overall pick. Moreover, the other two players that were in contention to be selected first overall by the Jags, Ekwonu and Neal, both have a prospect grade that is quite a bit higher than Walker's, and they both have the Year 1 starter tag as well. And as if that wasn't bad enough, you need to go all the way to the 8th pick to get to the first player that is ranked lower than Walker in terms of prospect grade. That is Drake London. The 9th selection, Charles Cross, is also ranked lower, but the 10th selection, Garrett Wilson, is once again ranked higher, which means that all but 2 players selected in the top 10 picks are ranked higher than Walker, which leads most to believe that the Jaguars selected the wrong player with their first overall selection. As if Walker didn't have big enough shoes to fill before, he will have to work incredibly hard to prove to the world that he is not a bust, and that he can be the amazing player that he was drafted to be. While I'm also in the camp that the Jaguars made the wrong call drafting Walker first overall, I do believe they got a great competitor and a talented young athlete that I hope can become an elite talent in the NFL. Making the NFL is not an easy road, and getting drafted first overall does have a great deal of weight behind it, and hopefully Walker is up to the task of carrying that weight for the rest of his career. That's all we got for you guys on the channel today. Thank you all so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed the video. We will see you all in the next one.